Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition, the show where we take you back to the good old days, just probably not exactly how you might expect from our title. I am Clayton Becker.
And I am Megan Cox.
And Megan, what are we going to talk about today? What are we rejecting this time?
Today, we are rejecting means testing and embracing universal programs.
All right, embracing universal programs, something I can get behind. I am familiar with what means testing is and how it works, but maybe just for those in our audience who are not super familiar with what means testing is in the first place, could you walk us through what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So means testing, basically the opposite of a universal program that everybody gets. Means testing just refers to the process of proving that you qualify for a governmental program on the basis of your income, your means. Means tested as an adjective refers to a program that only certain people qualify for, as opposed to a universal benefit that everybody qualifies for. Now, think the difference between Medicare, which everybody gets as a senior citizen or is eligible for, and Medicaid, which you qualify for on the basis of being below a certain income level.
Or maybe like we could think of it as well as like Social Security versus like unemployment benefits or something like that. Like everyone gets Social Security as an old person, regardless of your income level, right? Regardless of how much money you made while you were working. Mm-hmm. But you can only get like temporary assistance for needy families or unemployment benefits or other things if you meet certain.
Employment benefits is actually a good example of means testing because fair enough. In some way, it's tied to how much money you were making when you were working, but you don't not qualify for unemployment insurance if you were making above a certain threshold. I don't believe. It's another important thing to kind of keep separate is Social Security or public education. Not everybody qualifies for it on the basis of not being old enough or being too old. But if you fit within those age parameters, everybody gets to enjoy that benefit. Social Security and public education, not means tested. Those are universal programs. So we can see there's still a bunch of universal programs floating around there. But we really have moved away from creating universal programs as a society.
Yeah.
We tend to means test more and more things.
Like the eligibility for like the Obamacare marketplace subsidies as well is totally means tested. It's like means tested on a sliding scale as well. Like you get like a full subsidy below a certain level of income, and then the subsidy like slowly phases out as you make more money. Like it is a quintessentially means tested program.
Yes, absolutely. And any number of things we've been talking about over the past 4 years, even in a Democratic administration, we were talking about means testing. Things like student loan forgiveness. There was a threshold over which you did not qualify for the, I think, 10 grand in forgiveness. When I found out it was that little, I honestly kind of stopped paying attention because that is a drop in the bucket for me, my friend. But there's, a cutoff.
Don't go to law school, kids.
Don't go to law school, kids. There's a cutoff above which the argument was you're making too much money to deserve government assistance, basically. So that's the core of what means testing is. Below a certain amount of money, you get help. Above a certain amount of money, you don't get help.
Yeah. And I like to give maybe one more example of this. There's like, in public schools, which are like public education is a universal program. Even within universal programs, we have things like free and reduced lunch programs, which are themselves means tested in many states. So the difference between like free school meals for all students and only free and reduced lunch for students whose family make like a certain level of money, a certain percentage of the poverty line, right? I had someone in my TikTok comments like a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so, say, I'm not willing to pay more taxes so that we can feed rich 10-year-olds. And I'm like, how many of the 10-year-olds themselves are rich? But also, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the difference between universal school meals and means testing it to where only those students whose families make a small amount of money receive these programs.
Yes, absolutely. And there are a number of reasons why your TikTok commenter is bad and wrong. And we're going to talk about this.
as is the conceit of the show.
Yes,
Amazing.
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I do want to say, I actually tried to go and look at the history of means testing versus universal programs. I do think it is interesting to note that when you see the welfare state come online in the 1930s, 1940s, you're getting a lot more universal programs. Things like Social Security in the US, the National Health Service in the UK, those big everybody benefits programs. And those really phase out. Governments kind of retreat from that in the anglosphere. In about the Reagan-Thatcher era, this is when the paradigm shifts. You start to hear about the welfare queen stereotype. If I can plug Scam Goddess's episode about the welfare queen, it's a fascinating story. But generally, we start to see an idea that the more salient risk to people is not that they will be destitute by no fault of their own. It's much more likely that they will fear someone who is undeserving taking their money.
Yeah. I think to bring this into, you say, like, the anglosphere specifically, to provide an example of how this is, like, at least somewhat unique to the anglosphere. Like, when I was going to college in France, even as a non-French citizen, someone whose parents made significantly more than, like, the French poverty line, I was still eligible for a housing subsidy from the French government. Like, I still had to apply for it because they needed to know I was in the country and all that, but I was still eligible for, like, €177 a month housing subsidy from the French state as a foreign student in France. Like, that's the degree to which, like, that program is universal in France, as opposed to, like, Section 8 housing vouchers here in the United States. If you can qualify for them in the first place, even, you often cannot actually get access to these vouchers.
Stay tuned for, like, the world's greatest rabbit hole on Section 8, because I got super interested in this as I was researching this episode. But let's get into it. Let's get into why means testing
why are they
is bad.
Why is means testing bad?
So, first of all, something I want to say about this. I have never seen a consensus like this on anything ever. You can find research and writing supporting universal benefits over means testing in outlets ranging from Jacobin, which is socialist, maybe communist, a far left political thought magazine, to National Affairs, which is the publication of the American Enterprise Institute, an avowedly center-right institution. It is the thing that liberals, leftists, and center-right folks can agree on. I think at a certain point, as you move further right, there's a bit of a drop-off. But this
those are people who don't believe that we should have these programs at all. Not even they should just
indeed. Yes, indeed. These are the sorts of people where if you told them, like, the idea for a library, which is a universal benefit, they'd be like, no, we shouldn't do that. You never get a library system in existence today. But anyway, why then? What's the source of this agreement? Why is this bad? So reason number one that I want to talk about is actually means testing can cost more than a universal benefit.
Yeah, so I'm sure you're going to walk us through this, but like this argument to me, like I've heard this argument before. I've never like really looked into the data. But even as someone who supports universal programs and who thinks they are better for like the country and for people than means testing is, like, the math of this has never quite made sense to me. It's like, how is it that providing a universal benefit can actually be that much less expensive than trying to administer the means testing?
Well, so a couple of things. The first idea that I want to talk about just briefly is to say economies of scale are magic. If you are trying to do more things in a more centralized way, you can do them more efficiently under certain circumstances. The second component of this, why it is cheaper, is the staffing required to administer a means-tested program can cost more than not offering that benefit to other people who wouldn't be qualified under a means testing scheme.
So the idea being that, like, say a like universal benefit is like $1,000 a month per person or whatever, but the person you have to like the in order to administer this program, you have to hire 10,000 people and you're paying them $4,000 a month. Like for each one of those people you're hiring, you can give universal benefits to four more people. Okay,
yes,
I see.
Exactly. And you hit a point, and this is all, there's a lot of math involved. There's a lot of like calculus, I would imagine, to the figuring out of exactly what the cut point is for this. Mm-hmm. In terms of how big does the benefit need to be actually efficient, to be means tested. But just as an example, for people who have never applied for government benefits before or who haven't needed to do this in any sort of systemic way, as an example, when I lived in Washington, D.C. in 2014, I actually qualified for nutritional assistance. I qualified for food stamps on the basis of my income, which was very, very low. I had a brief period where I was just doing a minimum wage job for about 20 hours a week. And you cannot live on that. And the government of the District of Columbia agrees with that statement. So I was below the threshold. The process for getting food stamps, getting your EBT card, which is electronic benefits transfer, I believe, because food stamps aren't stamps anymore. They give you a debit card.
Yeah.
And the process for doing that required you to go to a DC office in person on a particular day with your documents and have an appointment with somebody, like you were going to the DMV, right? That's a person who needs to be paid to check off your benefits. And that costs money. That costs the government of the District of Columbia money. Every additional thing that they need to do to verify that you are qualified adds to the price of the program, versus just saying, if you want an EBT card, come to this office and we'll give you one. And we don't actually care if you really need it or not, because we assume if you don't need it, you're not going to bother.
Yeah, like this is another piece, I guess, of like universal programs versus means tested programs, which is that universal programs doesn't mean that like literally everyone is going to take you up on them, right? Like there are lots of people who, if like food stamps, if EBT was a universal program, they wouldn't then still go and get food stamps, right? Maybe some people would, but lots of people wouldn't. And so it's not like making a program that now say 80 million people are eligible for a thing that everyone is eligible for. That doesn't instantly mean that the program is going to double, triple, or quadruple in cost.
Exactly. Because there's a process, there are barriers, or there's just, people just don't feel like they need to. There's a really strong, this is another reason that means testing is bad. It reduces uptake because people tend to think, oh, that's not for me. Or when you go and you look to see what the threshold is, it turns out the threshold's actually higher than you thought. And you just never thought that you were the sort of person that, no, that's for a really poor person. It's not for me. It was a friend who told me, hey, I think you qualify for food stamps. And I said, no. And he's like, no, look up what the amount is. Because he, as a grad student, had qualified for food stamps. And so he encouraged me to go check that out.
And then I also imagine that, like, in addition to reducing the uptake because people think, oh, it's not for me, it's for really poor people, people who are qualified don't think to go and apply for it, it also dissuades people who are qualified to apply for it because it often has so many different steps that they need to go through.
Yes, exactly. So again, coming back to that situation in DC, I could not get food stamps because I didn't have documentation that my income was below the level required. So you create these barriers in an attempt to avoid fraud, which does happen, but happens so much less than you think. In an attempt to avoid fraud, you are creating a barrier to people who are truly needy and truly qualified for those programs. For me, I was fired from a job, got another job that paid me much, much less. They didn't give me a paycheck for 6 weeks, which was kind of weird and dramatic, but we don't need to go into that. I was young. I didn't know it was normal.
It's a rabbit hole we can go down later.
I didn't add this to the lore. But I knew I didn't qualify for unemployment because I hadn't been working for long enough. So is it really the preference of the District of Columbia that I apply for a benefit I know I'm going to get rejected from, but then use that documentation to show that I should be qualified for the food stamps? That, again, back to the inefficiency thing, but it's just creating these barriers to accessing needs. Additionally, we've got the program being less effective and less efficient. Back to that, this program isn't for me. Stigma in taking means-tested benefits is so big. It's so big. One of the reasons, an electronic benefits transfer card is a much more efficient way to distribute benefits, but it looks like a normal debit card. And that's really, I think, part of the reason that that's been embraced as policy. The stigma of trying to use your benefits can be very high for some people.
Yeah. I also think there's a degree to which like means tested programs are just sort of inherently more paternalistic or lend themselves more to paternalism, because you can imagine a scenario where like a universal benefit that applies to everyone, like people are less likely to think of like restrictions that they would want to place on the ability of people to use that benefit if they themselves think they might one day avail themselves of this benefit, or if they are currently using the benefit. Like there are fewer people, for example, who would say like, let's put restrictions on like what students are allowed to eat at school, right? Like, because they know that their own children, right, are going to be eating at school. They don't want to have their kids like explicitly limited in what they're allowed to purchase. But when it comes to EBT cards, like there are things you simply cannot buy with food stamps. Like
absolutely. Hot food. Oh God. It's like we have this argument every couple of years, like clockwork. Should you be able to buy soda?
Yeah.
With benefits? Should you be able to buy, I saw somebody buying steak, not for nothing. The cheapest food by calorie in this country is cake mix because of the subsidies on grain and sugar. But really, like, why wouldn't you want a poor kid to have a funfetti cake for their birthday?
And on top of that, like we know, like there is research on this that like shows that like food insecurity is actually associated with being overweight, because people are buying foods that are incredibly calorie dense, and they aren't buying things that aren't as calorie dense because it costs more to buy them for the same amount of like life-sustaining calories. Like you need a certain amount of calories every day, basically, and you're going to buy the things that do that
efficiently.
Right? You
just buy that. Eat the funfetti cake because it's actually like the most efficient way to feed a family. It's again, I could get all stressed out about this, and I'm not going to. But it creates terrible incentives for people. And it creates means testing benefits creates poverty traps. If the phase out is not done, as we were talking about with
benefits cliffs,
if like we were talking about with Obamacare subsidies, if the phase out is not basically dollar for dollar, you reach a situation where it may be harmful to a family to earn a little bit more money, because then they lose that benefit. They lose more money than they're actually gaining through working more.
Yeah, and there are some programs, fewer nowadays than there used to be, but that like just straight up have a benefits cliff.
Yeah, like we figured this out. We figured out that this is a problem, so we don't have as many of these programs now. Yeah. But this was a huge problem.
Yeah, like and it is still somewhat of a problem for certain smaller programs where like you make a little bit too much and you immediately lose the benefit. And that's not particularly helpful, because it means that you do not have an incentive. Like people talk about like these programs not incentivizing people to work, right? Like that's actually what a benefits cliff does.
Yes.
Because if you can only make, say, $250 more a month or something, but the benefit you were getting is $500 a month, then your very explicit incentives is to stay below that threshold. This is why we have like these phased out benefits where it's basically dollar for dollar. you make more money and you get that much less in the benefit to avoid this exact kind of benefits cliff, this exact kind of incentive.
Exactly. So we know that the uptake is less than we would want it to be. It's less than 100% of people who are eligible for it. The Urban Institute released a report where they examined the uptake rates of 7 different benefits programs. They looked at SNAP, TANF, and WIC, which are nutrition assistance, SSI, which is disability insurance, a childcare subsidy, an energy subsidy, and Section 8, which is housing vouchers. And they found that if all eligible people, 100% of people who are eligible, were to avail themselves of 100% of the benefits to which they are entitled on the basis of their income, poverty would drop from 14.7% in the United States, that's the current level, to 10.1%. And for children, it would drop from 15.2% to 8.5%.
So like nearly 50%.
So
that's that. So maybe the abstract numbers sound a certain way, right? But like 14.7 to like 10.1% of the population, there's roughly like 335 million people in the United States. That's, let's call it a 4.5% drop. 1% of the population is 3.35 million people here in the United States.
It's almost 10 million people.
It's more than 10 million people. Yeah. 4.5 times 3.35 is like nearly 15 million.
Jesus, right? Yeah, this is why I don't do math on the fly.
It's nearly 15 million people. And for children, like that 50% drop, that's also millions of children who would be lifted out of poverty by the definitions of poverty that we use, if they just were able to avail themselves of the programs to which they are legally eligible.
We have already decided that this is a good thing to do, and
that these people should have access to these programs. Like this is not the debate, right? The debate is like not about whether people who are living in these conditions deserve these benefits. At least not outside of like the lunatic fringe right. Like that's not where the debate is. And yet, people are not using the benefits to which they are eligible.
Yeah, exactly.
Not great. Not great.
No. But okay, so then let's talk about why means-tested programs are bad politically.
Okay.
Because this is another kind of angle to this, and we talk about, we went from these huge universal benefits, which were like very effective, to means-tested benefits, which are not. They are easier to repeal. They're easier to eliminate. Debate about their implementation gets bogged down in who benefits. This is, again, back to the Biden student loan cancellations. Like, how much money counts for being so rich that we shouldn't be paying off your student loans?
Yeah, notions of deservingness, right?
Yes, who is deserving? Yeah,
which we should note here. I think quite importantly, especially in the United States, notions of deservingness are like incredibly and just inextricably tied to race.
Yeah.
There is a huge literature in political science that when people think that the benefits of a program are primarily going to non-white people, white people become less supportive of those programs.
The intersectionality here is very important.
And that is the perception of lots of these means-tested programs, in a way that it is not the perception of programs like public education or Social Security or Medicare, any of the real like universal programs that we actually do have in the United States. Like no one considers like the home mortgage interest deduction, which, by the way, is actually pretty bad because it gives most of its benefits to the wealthiest homeowners. But nobody considers that program, which is a universal program eligible to anyone who can buy a home and have a mortgage practically, with like a certain cap on like the level you can deduct. Nobody thinks of that program as like primarily benefiting non-white people. And so basically nobody is like, we should get rid of this thing. No one is deserving. No one says that about Social Security, about Medicare, but everyone says it about SNAP benefits, food stamps for temporary assistance for needy families. Everyone says it about Section 8, so on and so forth. Like everyone loosely. You know who I'm talking about.
We know who you're talking about.
Those guys.
So people are already less likely to be supportive of a program that they don't think that they'll benefit from. We know this. And you can see that creating and maintaining a means-tested program could be difficult if you're in a let's cut stuff sort of political climate. Then you are going to look to those means testing programs first. But why do Americans feel this way about poor people is an interesting question to ask, even taking out of the equation the aforementioned racialized aspect of it. If we pull that out and don't address that, we all know it's there. Nobody's fooling anybody. But how Americans feel about poor people, or the people who are more likely to be poor, is a very important component of the political unpopularity of these means-tested programs. So, Cato Institute. Again, I'm citing a conservative publication. Cato Institute survey from 2019 asks people to identify from a list the 3 reasons they think are the key drivers of poverty. Why are people in poverty? The modal choice, some high 40s percentage, more than 40% of people picked, of their 3, poor choices. There's also, on the flip side, when they ask, what do you think determines being wealthy? They think that hard work determines wealth rather than structural factors. This is especially true among conservatives, but it was also true among liberals to a kind of surprising extent. They also find the second most popular response to why are people poor is drug and alcohol abuse. Interestingly, poor people in their sample were also pretty likely to cite drug and alcohol abuse as one of their 3 reasons determining poverty. There is a conservative publication, an American Enterprise Institute report that I read that includes a study from 1971, back, I guess, when IRBs were just letting people do anything. There's a study on how people feel about others they're randomly assigned to be mean to, basically. There's much more of a setup there, but I'm not going to go into it. So if you have been randomly assigned to be mean to a particular person, you are more likely to report that you dislike that person. So by society being harsher on poor people over and over again, you increase your feelings of antipathy towards poor people, basically.
The persistent negative affect towards poor people, it's sort of a self-reinforcing thing. You're assigned, quote unquote, to be mean to them, and then you create this long-term negative valence towards poverty. And so then it looks like, oh, well, these programs to help the poor, that's rewarding poverty, rewarding these bad choices, in a way that if these programs were universal, people absolutely would not feel this way about them.
It's true. I also think there's a certain amount of, people don't like to think that they're mean. So you got to come up with a reason.
Yeah. I'm not being mean to these people. I am not, I'm not being the jerk here. I'm not the bad guy, right? It's like these people need to be a little bit of tough love, right? There's the rationalization of it where people are thinking well, there's you gotta whip these people into shape, you gotta make sure that they know what's up. You gotta give them the what for, right? To use some terms from the
weirdly dated language.
Well, no, the group of people who I most often hear this from, which is old people receiving universal benefits.
Yes, right. Can you imagine cutting a universal benefit? No,
the mere suggestion that Trump is thinking of having to make cuts to Medicare and Social Security in order to fund his big tax cuts for wealthy people is causing people to yell and scream at Republican members of the House of Representatives in town halls, to the extent that last week, the chair of the NRCC told Republican members of the House to stop holding town halls in their districts.
That'll work, I'm sure. It'll do it.
Totally
if
work.
I ignore it, it's not there.
If they can't yell at you, then it's not a problem.
Old enough to remember when this torpedoed George W. Bush's second term. So, everything old is new again. I could take us on a nice little rabbit hole into how Section 8 housing really summarizes all of these problems. or we could take a quick break and I can deal with the persistent canine chaos that is surrounding me at the moment.
Let's take a little bit of a break. I'm not sure if you guys can hear in the background that Megan's dog is just totally freaking out, but we'll come back. Then Megan will take us down a rabbit hole, and then we will talk about how we solve this problem. All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. When we left you, Megan was dealing with some canine chaos in her apartment. She's dog sitting this week for a very lovely 15-year-old gentleman who wanted to get on the couch.
But he's blind and deaf-ish and has bad knees, and I get it.
Yeah, I was telling Megan during the break, you know, if I were the equivalent of roughly 97 years old, I might also want to be helped onto the couch. But anyway, we were going to talk to you when we were going out about this Section 8 vouchers and how they sort of create, they have a case study for us here as to just how means testing can like really screw things up. So Megan, take it away. What's wrong with Section 8?
So I got super into this when I was reading that Urban Institute report that I mentioned to you, and it said that the Section 8 uptake rate was incredibly low, like in the teens. And that means the number of people who are qualified for Section 8 on the basis of their income, it's down in 17%, 14%, something like that for the number of people or the percentage of people who are qualified for it are able to use it. I'm like, well, what is that about? Is it just landlords electing not to accept it? And how is that legal? Wouldn't you just make it illegal? And in many cases, it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of someone wanting to use a Section 8 voucher. But there's a little more to it than that, and it's a little more complicated. First of all, let's talk about this. Having people housed is good.
People housed is good. It's true. Shocking stuff, but it is good for people.
You heard it here first, gang. This is true not just for people who are unhoused, but also people who live in crowded housing, overcrowded housing, or need a path out of a dangerous living situation. People who are housed, you and me, housed, it's great.
Facts.
Many people who are housed don't like to encounter people who are unhoused. There's a perception that unhoused people are dangerous, or at the very least unpredictable. I would submit to you that it's not super surprising that individuals who are sleeping rough, sleeping out on the streets, behave in ways that read to us as unpredictable or unstable.
I would also submit that the research suggests that homeless people are not, in fact, as a rule, particularly dangerous. They are far, far more likely to be the victims of crimes.
More likely to be the victims of crimes than the perpetrators of crimes.
Yes, and like most of, also, I should note here that most of the unhoused population in the United States, like most people who are homeless on any given night, are not unsheltered. Most of them are living like in shelters, or they're living out of vehicles, or they are living like with people they know. Most people in this population are not the person you see it on the street, and yet the same problems of Section 8 not working and limited housing supply and high housing costs hit them the same way.
It persists. And you can't get a job without filling out an I-9 and a W-4. Both of those documents require an address. In many circumstances, I don't think you can get a checking account if you need to without an address. Let's say you are trying to get out of a situation where you had a joint checking account with a partner and you need to get a new one, but you don't have an address. How are you doing that?
Yeah.
It is the path up, the path out of poverty or unstable situations requires housing. And we all kind of know that.
And I should note here as well, I don't think this is still the case, because the housing crisis has gotten significantly worse since these numbers I'm remembering. But back in like 2014, 2015, 2016, the number one cause for homelessness among women and children was domestic violence. I don't think this is the case anymore. It's still one of the higher ones up there. For that few year stretch in like the middle of the 2010s, the number one cause for why women and children became homeless in the United States was domestic violence. And yet, completely unable to access these benefits and access stable housing after the fact in many cases.
Mm-hmm. So we might ask, we know it's important for people to be housed. So why is the uptake of this benefit that we've already created to solve this problem so low? So when you dig into why and how landlords are refusing to accept Section 8, you see a couple of reasons. First of all, very much telling on themselves, I think. Landlords don't want inspections from the Public Housing Authority that they must have in order to qualify to receive Section 8 vouchers. So there's a possibility here that it's like, oh, that office is super backed up. It's really hard to get an appointment, blah, blah, blah. So maybe it's not that the apartments are full of black mold and it's just an administrative hassle. Maybe. I'm hoping for those folks that it's the case.
I'd say there's probably at least a little of both. But regardless, it's a problem in any circumstance. And as we just talked about rejecting small government and embracing government capacity a couple of weeks ago, even if it is mostly that former thing of the office being super backed up, that's also something we should solve.
We should fix that problem. Yeah, relatedly, there's paperwork involved that the landlords would just as soon not do, apparently. There's the concern that the tenants will have bad credit or maybe be less likely to be able to pay the portion of the rent that is not covered by Section 8. This is something that we could fix legislatively. Like, of course, my brain immediately goes to, how would I change the law to solve this? If the government were able to kind of guarantee the shortfall in the rent, that resolves that problem. But there's, I don't want to, worry about it or whatever from the landlords. Fine. Fourth, and what appears to really be the primary driver here, is landlords think that Section 8 users will bring issues like drug use, noise, or similar antisocial behaviors, and or will damage the unit more than tenants who are not using Section 8 vouchers. So that really leads you to ask the question, on what basis do the landlords think that? Have they actually encountered a person using Section 8 benefits who's damaged their property? Why do benefits mean that a person will exhibit these behaviors? Or is it really based on stereotypes?
This broader perception. Hearing it from a friend of a friend of a friend who had a Section 8 tenant and something bad happened.
Yeah. Or, maybe it's that, or maybe it's just, I think poor people exhibit these behaviors that I don't want in my property.
Or in many cases, perhaps hearing from a friend of a friend of a friend that they had a tenant where something bad happened and assuming that tenant was a Section 8 voucher recipient.
Or do you just, maybe you've had Section 8 tenants before and non-Section 8 tenants, and they're really exhibiting the same behaviors, but you notice it more with the Section 8 tenant because you're primed to notice it more. You're prepared because you've already got
because of the inspections.
Yeah. Confirmation bias, you're already ready to notice that. So that's really where we start to see all of these things kind of swirling around. The bias that people have towards governmental benefits recipients and also the inefficiency of means-tested benefits are preventing people from availing themselves of a benefit that we've all already decided they should have and that we actually really want them to use. Most people, for whatever reason, good, bad, compassion, indifference, anger, resentment, for whatever reason, most of us don't actually like encountering unhoused people. And we would prefer them be housed. And I bet you they'd prefer them be housed too. And we're not actually solving the problem because this structure of this means-tested program allows too many opportunities for it to fail.
Section 8 might be perhaps like an extreme example here with an exceptionally low uptake rate. But this same sort of logic and the same sort of stigma that is attached to using these Section 8 housing vouchers similarly exists in basically all means-tested programs. There's this sense, at least, in the American public, and as Megan mentioned, among people who are living in poverty themselves that taking government benefits is often this shameful thing that they shouldn't be doing.
40% of parents whose kids qualify for free or reduced price school meals say their kids don't want to eat them because they are being either actually teased or afraid that they will be teased because they are taking government benefits. That is something that goes away if school meals are universally free.
For everyone. Yeah. Like
for everyone.
There's no, yeah. Like the idea that nearly half of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch would not want to take it because they would be afraid of their peers, other children, making fun of them for being poor, I think should maybe tell us like just how fucking insane this has gotten and just how ingrained this like anti-poverty bias is in American society right now. Like children are going hungry so they don't get teased. Like I don't think you have to be a bleeding heart liberal to recognize that is fucking nuts. That's like insane. Completely insane. And the fact that it's and the fact that it's coming from like the pro-life crowd, right? Like don't even get me started.
That's a rant trigger, but that's
another episode.
That is another episode. So why are universal benefits good? We're already into it. We managed to avoid that stigma when a benefit is seen as something that is good for everyone. To your example, Clayton, I'm sure there's no stigma about taking your French housing voucher,
none that I was ever aware of, at least.
Situation. Yeah, I'm in school, so I get a voucher to help me pay for housing. And if we were to kind of chase that down a little bit more, why is that good? It's probably the same reason that French higher education is subsidized so heavily in the first place anyway. Educating people is good for all of society. We have talked about this in past episodes.
Times, yeah. I mean, I will say specifically with regards to the French case, that there are certain ways in which the French educational system, the higher educational system in particular, does like fail students in some ways, but it's based on this like fundamentally egalitarian ethos of like everyone deserves the chance to succeed in university. The way that French universities work is basically like if you graduate high school, if you pass the French baccalaureate exam, like pass du bac, which is like their version of a high school diploma.
Okay, you got to take like an exit test.
Yeah, like if you pass the French bac, then you can go to university. Like basically the closest one to like where you live is fundamentally how it works. Like you can have a guaranteed enrollment to like that university. There are problems. Like I said, 65% of French university students quit after the first year, probably because they weren't meant to go to university in the first place. We just do the selection on the front end. Making it so that like only the people who we deem qualified are gonna succeed, go to university in the first place, yada yada yada. But the fundamental belief in this idea that everyone should be able to access higher education, like that's what makes that like subsidy to the French university system universal. And it's that kind of universal ethos that I think we would be better served by putting into at least certain programs here in the United States.
Yeah, it's hard to speak effectively to the idea why all programs should be universal without speaking to the justification for each individual program. But as a general matter, if we've already decided that the output of the means-tested program is good, we should want it to be more effective. And as we've outlined, one of the best ways to make a program more effective is to make it universal.
Yeah, like there might be certain programs that we think, well, this actually would be far less efficient if we were giving it to everyone, right? Mm-hmm. Potentially. You could envision a program that would look like that.
Yeah, but the default
should be, let's start with the idea that these programs will be universal. And as we are designing them or as we are reforming them, only if it becomes clear that would be a bad idea, then do we switch to the means testing. As opposed to what we're doing right now, which is starting with the opposite assumption, that these things should be means tested, and rarely even considering whether they would be better as universal programs during the design and implementation phase.
Yes, absolutely. So what do we do? As is always our practice on our lovely little podcast here, we want to tell you what we think the solutions might be. Solution number one, as I racked my brains on this one, is really as simple as tell the people who want small means tested programs to go pound sand.
Do politics. Do politics. Reject issue polling, embrace persuasive politics. We did a whole episode on this. You got to convince people that your ideas are right.
Yes, yes. And majorities are for doing things. Like, this just keeps being my bailiwick. There's why do you want to get a majority of seats in your legislative body? Why do you want to secure the executive? Is it just to be there? Is it just to prevent the other side from doing bad things? Maybe sometimes, but it's also to implement big ideas, big effective programs.
It's to do stuff.
Lifting people out of poverty is a thing we should do, man. So there are many different ways that you could kind of think about making this more palatable for folks. This, again, super weedsy if you're into legislative process. Something as simple as writing up a fiscal impact statement for a universal version of the program, not just a means-tested version of the program, to demonstrate that it is more financially efficient for the government to universalize a program. That might be an idea. Let states do things. Laboratories of democracy. States can try things out. If this universal school lunch thing works in Minnesota, we may be seeing it come to other states. Many other states have introduced similar bills on the basis of Minnesota. Universal pre-K is another example. Itemized tax receipts for universal programs. I was looking at a copy of someone's itemized tax receipt from Australia. And it's not even just generally like these are the percentages. It's $15 for defense spending out of the $2,000 you paid in tax, sort of thing.
Yeah, this is a thing that I find interesting, and I think like countries that are not the United States actually do somewhat regularly. Like they provide like exactly how much of your tax money like goes to funding certain programs, and like if you can see right that like the majority of your tax dollars are not going to the thing that you think is terrible, or you can see like, oh, like the amount of money that like I am spending so that like other people in the country can like have food is $4 a year or something like that, right? Or something along those lines, because these programs are not actually that expensive compared to the size of the federal budget. That I think does a lot to reduce how bad people feel about those programs.
Mm-hmm. I genuinely think that is one thing that Democrats should push through the next time they have a majority, because that Republicans are the ones who don't want this. A lot like, we won't do automatic tax filing. We make you file your taxes. Even if you're using a program, we make you do it. Other countries don't make you file your taxes. They know how much money you make and how much money they need to take. And it's
also
not
notably, the IRS also knows how much you owe in taxes. And if you get it wrong, if you get the wrong answer, then it's bad for you. Like, anyway, this is a whole separate topic. But the idea basically is make this whole thing a little bit more transparent so that people can see like how much we actually spend on these kinds of benefits. Because truthfully, for a lot of them, it is not very much. Like, the United States spends way more on things like Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and the like federal, the national army, basically, right?
Defense apparatus,
all defense spending, and like also like veterans programs. Spends way more on that than they spend on like all of the programs combined that we've talked about in this episode, except with the exception of Medicaid, which is actually a fairly large part of the federal budget.
Yeah. I think that is the most important thing, because it's the black box nature of it that allows people who want government to be smaller and programs to be smaller to keep people ramped up about these programs and about wanting to, well, you shouldn't, these poor people are trying to take your money. No, they're not.
I think like it removes some of the like problems of scale, I think we could say. Because like people are really bad, I think, at differentiating the scale of numbers when they get to a certain level. Like the difference between a million and a billion. There's this like I can't remember exactly what the figures are, but this like joke sort of that goes like a million seconds is like 12 days or something like that. It's like a couple weeks. A billion seconds is like 43 years or something like that. It's like a huge difference in magnitude. Absolutely
I was just
enormous.
thinking about almost exactly that. Like, how long does it take to count to a million sort of thing?
Yeah. It's an absolutely like enormous difference, right? And so, and the same scale of difference between a million and a billion is the difference between $1 billion and $1 trillion. And people they lose all sense of scale when it comes to just how big those differences are. And so if someone on the right wing can say this program cost the United States $12 billion a year, that sounds like a hell of a lot of money. But compared to like the roughly $5 trillion that the federal government spends every year, somewhere along those lines, like that really is not very much. And so showing that to people on a tax return of like, of this $1,000 in taxes that you spend, like
47 cents.
47 cents went to like SNAP benefits. Like $37 went to Social Security, right? Like so on and so forth, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the biggest and the most implementable policy idea that we've maybe ever had on the show. But that is just the thing that we should do. And majorities are for doing things. Just do it. Democrats lost the 2010 midterms because of Obamacare, but Obamacare persists.
Obamacare is still here. It's true.
Still here, shockingly.
15 years later, because people like it.
And it's the universal parts of it that have stuck around. People like it. This was the logic. And this is what Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, all the different people who were involved in this process were saying at the time. Once people get the benefit, taking it back is going to be really, really hard. And that's true. Republicans step on a rake every time they try to repeal Obamacare because they don't know what they want to put in its place. So majorities are for doing things. Let's make people less poor. Let's also reduce social barriers to the extent possible between the rich and the poor. I think that's a really important idea. Very weirdly, I think that this is one of the things that social media can do well. It is creating kind of an unfortunate, like, affluence arms race almost.
Yeah.
But you also get to see, like, a woman who makes a video about, like, how I feed my family of 4 on $25 a week. Let's go to, Dollar General and buy groceries. And that's not something I would have experienced, not to brag. It just wouldn't have occurred to me to go grocery shopping at Dollar General. But she's making nutritious meals for her family on very little money. And that's useful. And you get to know this person and go like, oh, parasocially, you seem like a cool person. That's useful. To the extent that we can encourage people to participate in society together, this is, again, a reason why public school is good, because everybody's kids get educated together. To the extent that we can show each other the ways that we live and break down the stigma that comes with poverty, I think that's a helpful idea going forward for making these programs more embraced and universalizing them more.
Yeah, like break down the stereotypes about how people perceive poor Americans. Because the thing is like, we sort of we beat around the bush just a little bit earlier in the episode about these stereotypes. But the thing is that like these stereotypes about who are the poor, quote unquote, the poor in America are totally incorrect. Like
just wild. Yes.
They basically do not resemble what actual poverty looks like in most parts of the country. Like, it's not these like destitute people who like can't hold down a job and like, can't go into work because they're like all high on drugs and alcohol. It's like most people who are poor are working poor. Like, they're part of the working class. They're being, outstripped by all sorts of different like social and economic factors. They're just trying to keep up, and they're just not making it because of, like, quite frankly, structural conditions in many cases that are totally out of their control. Like, the perception that people have of poverty in America is not the reality of poverty in America.
Absolutely. So, what do you think?
I think these make decent sense. I mean, we spent the most time on it, obviously, so I particularly like it. But yeah, I mean, like, showing people where their money is going, I think really does help, like, get rid of this, as you called it, a black box, right, of the federal budget process. And it makes it much clearer for people that, like, oh, well, when this Republican senator says that we're spending $12 billion on this thing, that's not actually, like, stopping you from having, like, medical treatment or social security or healthcare. Like,
any of these line items that show up in the Doge reporting, I'm like, oh, million with an M? Get out of here.
Yeah, like, basically irrelevant, right? Sorry, this is going to be like a totally different, this is going to be not related to the episode at all. But did you see, like, the story about Donald Trump saying that we spent $8 million on making mice transgender? And it turned out that what actually happened was they were doing transgenic research, like gene splicing, like trying to introduce human cells into mice to figure out how to cure diseases, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh, they're just illiterate, right? Like,
I mean, anyway. Not as, like, they don't know what the words mean.
But, like, but on this topic, right, of, like, even if it was $8 million to study mice being transgender, that would be silly, of a penny. Right? Yeah, that would be silly, but it wouldn't actually matter in the grand scheme of the federal budget. Like, yeah, like you said, every time, like, these line items come out of Doge, you're like, oh, this department is, like, only using 50 of their 300 Microsoft 365 licenses. And I'm like, okay, great. I'm pretty sure that, like, my department at work, the job I worked before I started
didn't cancel your license?
Probably didn't use all of our licenses either, right? Like,
you get chunks. You can't get, like, 27. You have to buy 30. Again, such a tangent, dude. But we can demonstrate to people that there is even accepting the premise that there is a place to cut or things to cut in the budget. If what we're looking for is efficiency and the best bang for your buck, it's making programs more universal, not less.
Making programs more accessible, making it so that more people have access to them. Because as we said up at the top of the episode, right? Like, and all throughout, really, like, the programs that are extremely popular in the United States, programs like Social Security, programs like Medicare, even, like, programs you have to have done something specific to qualify for, like being a veteran, right? Like, you don't, as far as I'm aware at least, get your veterans benefits cut if you make too much money after your time in the military. Like, that's not how that works.
I don't think so, and I think that's part of the concern over VA cuts at this point is the deal was we got these benefits.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, but the point is, like, you look at the programs that are popular, you look at the ones that, like, are sort of the third rail of American politics to touch. Like, I think Social Security is, like, the big one,
the classic,
like the classic one, as we talked about, like, like George Bush's attempts to, like, even privatize a portion of it, even before the financial crisis. Totally torpedoed his second term to the point.
Yeah, a lot of people think it was Katrina, but this happened first.
Yeah, to the point where, like, he just could not do anything for, like, the last 2 years of his presidency. The programs that are popular are universal ones. And if we want a, like, robust welfare state, if we want one that looks like it does in our peer nations around the world, with things like universal healthcare, with things like robust unemployment benefits, with food assistance that doesn't suck and have all of these, like, restrictions on what you are allowed to buy with it, if we want all of those things, then one of the best ways to get there is to make it so that everyone has access to these kinds of programs. And so they don't associate the program itself with undeservingness and this idea that we should just try to control the choices of people on that program, because otherwise they're going to make bad ones.
You said it best. I can't say any more than that. It's the easy button. And we should consider pushing it.
It is the easy button, and we should, in fact, consider pushing it. But until then, until we take the do good things button out of the closet and replace the make the economy bad button that Trump continues to hover his hand over. Until we do those things, I have been Clayton Becker.
I have been Megan Cox.
And we will see you guys on the next one.